Good evening, everyone. Gonna just give it a few seconds for some people to hop on. And as you hop on, please make a comment, say hello, so I can know that you can hear me and see me clearly. Before we get started, this is another episode of the sexual miseducation of Black men, and I just want to welcome you guys and taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. So I'll give it a few seconds. Let me get at least one or two people in here before we start. So man, as you come in, please just give it a like or definitely share this as it broadcasts and make a comment so I can know that you're here with us before I hop on to it. For those of you that don't know, my name is AB Bracewell, and as I said, this is another episode of the sexual miseducation of Black men. I appreciate those that have been joining the conversation and have been watching over the past couple of weeks. Those is definitely that have been joining us, participating in our special series pertaining to African American history and the sexual miseducation of Black men. As I always say, always try to give a brief discussion, or I should say, description of why I even hold these conversations. And aside from holding these conversations, I hold some events outside of this. The main purpose is to help Black men to explore and examine some of our unhealthy, toxic ways of that we've learned about sex, and examine the impact that it has on us emotionally and psychologically and relationally, and how it has an effect on the way we function in our families and our relationships and community. Another big purpose of why we have these conversations and why we get together is to help the next generation of men to discover more appropriate, more effective, and more proper ways of measuring their own manhood, to help them understand that their manhood is not measured by the amount of women that they sleep with or how well they perform in the bed. We also want to help parents that are out there watching that have questions or that has hit a dead end, or have some concerns because they have a young Black man growing up, and they're not then they haven't had that conversation or they're afraid to have that conversation. We try to equip them, with the right education and some firsthand experience from Black men on what he might be going through, and how to spark that conversation, how to get curious, and explore these topics with him. And of course, lastly, is for adult men. We want to help adult men to overcome, I would say, one of the biggest pitfalls, so one of the biggest barriers to us fulfilling our purpose, and living out, our dreams and reaching our goals. And that pitfall is usually the our connection or our um, following of just unattached, unadulterated sex. That has been a pitfall for so many Black men. And my goal is to help us to overcome that temptation and to be able to identify our purpose, our assignment, and try to achieve those things. So tonight is no different than any other night. I have some very special guests with me tonight. And as you can see, scrolling across the screen, the topic is from property to misogyny. So we're going to give some special attention to the way that our history has affected the way that we see women, how our women was treated and viewed back then, um, especially when it pertains to slavery. And we're going to also talk about some ways we can help change that narrative and change the view and help heal some of the hurt that have been caused. If you've been a part of the conversations before, we talked about several different topics pertaining to this. And tonight, will actually be the finale of our Black History conversation. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring on some of my guests, and we're going to hop into the conversation. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right into the discussion. Hey, good brothers, how y'all doing this evening?
Good evening. How are you?
We're doing well, doing well, doing well. Thank you for being a part of the show, being a part of the conversation. First thing I want to do is have you guys introduce yourselves to those that are on. So yeah, just and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
You want me to go
Uh,
first?
Sure.
All right, I'll go first. So my name is Akil Parker. I'm a math professor at Cheney University. Prior to that, I was a high school math teacher in the Philadelphia school system. I taught at a few traditional public schools and several different charter schools. I also have a company called All This Math, where we provide private math tutoring and also educational consulting. And we're really trying to change the relationship that the Black community has with mathematics. So math is not a bully that we try to avoid, but also we start to see math as a viable tool to help us to solve our problems as Black people. And also, I'm a father of three and a reader and a writer and a Pan Africanist. So that's a little bit of my background.
well, good evening, everyone. My name is James Brown. I'm the writer, producer, and host of the Fall to Rise podcast. I'm also the executive producer, co-writer, and co-host of the Extreme Truth podcast. I'm actually very, very excited to be here because these types of topics are the topics that we discuss in our own homes, but we never bring them outside of the home, so we never actually get a chance to tackle them or to receive other perspectives. So I'm definitely thankful to Brother Bracewell for inviting me to this show and covering this topic.
I thank you guys for being a part of the show. I really appreciate the time that you're taking out. I'm sure you're busy scheduled, father of three and executive producer of so many shows. I'm sure y'all could be doing something with your time. So I appreciate it. So let's jump right into the conversation. I'm gonna try not to keep y'all on too late tonight. But I know sometimes these conversations can get deep and they can kind of take a life of its own. So as I was telling y'all earlier before we hopped on, um, the reason why I started having these conversations is because I have a son of my own. He just turned 13. And, at that age is a very impressionable age with a whole lot of changes going on in his body, in his mind, in his hormones. And I can remember, for me, at the age of 12 or 13, when I really started to pay attention to girls and relationships, some of the messages that I was started to receive, I started to really listen to when it came to sex and relationships and women. And all of them were not healthy at all. Um, but before I even get into that, I want you guys to kind of think back to your more formative years as you was growing up as a young guy. And would you describe the level of education or the type of information that you received about sex and women and relationships as healthy or unhealthy? And go into exactly what that was.
Well, if I start, I would say it was like a mixture. I would say there was some healthy, some unhealthy. I know, like biologically speaking, I guess, and physiologically speaking, in middle school, I took a sex education course, but that didn't really speak to how, like, the socialization process of how, like, boys and girls, men and women should interact, on a sexual basis. A lot of those cues kind of came from the example of, like, excuse me, the example of, like, my parents, But that was one example. But then as I started to get a little older in my teens and in my adolescent years, I started to see what other teenagers were doing and what they were not, maybe not even so what they were doing, but what they were talking about. And I know at that age I was very gullible, so when if I heard somebody saying like, they were, hitting all these chicks, then I knew I wasn't quote unquote hitting all these chicks. So I felt like at a disadvantage. And then I also realized that as a boy, like not being a virgin, there was a certain amount of social capital attached to that. So then, I'm like, well, I'm still a virgin. So then I start, I was in those situations where you lie, until you actually do like lose your virginity. Um, and then that just so you're making up stories. You got to make up some girl's name and say like because your friends always go, people go to press you to say like, well, what's her name, like what school she go to, where she live at, all that. But never taking the time to really think and say, well, why is it such a bad thing to be a virgin? Kind of just not even doing that critical thinking at the age of like 11 or 12 or 13 even. So kind of like, there was my peer group was responsible for a lot of that like socialization. And then like at the same time, to be quite honest, like I guess you would say mainstream media, more so rap music, because I was very much into rap music. I think like, movies and TV shows also have played a large role in that. But for me personally, and a lot of my peers, it was the rap music, because like we were like I had a father. I grew up in a nuclear household. I had a father and a mother. They were married, but almost I think I got to the point where I saw it as like one of the reasons in my own ignorance, I didn't think my father was cool because of the fact that he had quote unquote one woman. And the rappers are talking about quantity. It's all about quantity, right? Just like how you got to have a lot of gold chains, you got to have a lot of cars, you got to have a lot of money, a lot of houses, a lot of women. Women are commodified in Western society, and that's something that we've learned from Europeans. So then I'm looking at them like, okay, this is the standard. Like this is what I should be doing as a young black boy, right? Trying to collect women the way I ended up years later becoming a sneakerhead, like way we collect sneakers. So a lot of that came from yeah, a lot of it did come from commercial rap music, I would say, but also not being trained to properly question in media literacy so that I could properly question the commercial rap music, I would say was the bigger issue. Because my father, he was kind of adamant. He would definitely try his best to try to insulate me from it. But it got to a point where my friends they all have access to the music. So when I go to school, I'm hearing about the music. I'm hearing the music, from my friends, from my peer group. And when I'm in the neighborhood, when I'm around the way, I'm getting access to it. And then at the same time, by him kind of just the way his approach was just to try to deny me access, that made me want it more. Instead of so like as when I became an adult and I had my son, I took a different approach. I would engage it, and then I would try to point out the contradictions, for my son. I do the same thing with my daughter. So kind of just because I want you to like, I want them to think about constantly like, okay, like, well, why does that make sense? Like, listen to that lyric, listen to what he just said, right? Listen to what he just said about her, or listen to what she just said about him. Like, why do those things make sense? And why should we want to emulate that? And why does it make us happy? So, so that's one thing I learned like from my own experience growing up and being exposed to the commercial rap music, which in turn informed a lot of my thinking about girls when I was young, and then even when I got became a grown man, and about women, and how I should engage with women.
Yeah, I could definitely relate. I could relate to a lot of what you said. What about you, James?
Uh, I was fortunate, as a brother of Kill was to grow up in a nuclear household, so I was given information about dating, about girls, from a very early age. You know, people try to push, I guess, sex or sexuality on these young men at an early age. You figure when you're taking family life for the first time when you're maybe in fifth or sixth grade, so you're learning about sex for the first time. Everything about being a young boy is about boasting. It's about bragging about things that you've done. So even if you yourself are not having sex, you're going to brag about, yeah, I've had sex, I've had all of these women. And as Brother Rakil stated, you then start to listen to music. Every popular rapper, they rap about three things: I'm a gangster, I have money, I have girls. You have to have one of those three. If in society, if you don't have those three things, you're not seen as successful. You're seen as quote unquote corny. So when you get to high school, in an effort to try to fit in, you try to get the girls. You try to be hypersexualized. You try to brag about, your sexual prowess, whether you're doing it or not. And then we add in the influx of pornographic material in high school. You're dealing with your hormonal issues, but then porn comes out. I'm in an age range where pornographic material first started to hit the internet. So I was in that age range where you could access a picture or video. Granted, this is when dial-up was out, so it may take you about 15 minutes to download a 5-second clip. But I was in that age range, so the views on sex, even though I may have had a different view from my parents or from my upbringing or household, that's great. But you still, in a sense, fall in love with the fantasy. That's kind of why we like hip hop. That's kind of why we like music. That's why we like celebrities, because it's like a fantasy that we want to live. We want to live that life. Unfortunately, most of it is a lie. Most of it is fake. Uh, 90% of it is fabricated to make us believe that this is true when it's actually not. And unfortunately, we tend to fall into the traps of trying to mimic what we see on either television, pornographic movies, or on uh, movies in general.
Mhm.
So again, I feel that I was in a fortunate position. I kind of laugh at the fact that when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to listen to music with curses in it. So I would have to kind of sneak away to one of my friends' houses, as play that DMX album with headphones on. I remember that I got in trouble in high school because I had an Eminem album on tape. And I'm kind of dating myself right now, and I was listening to it with headphones, and my mom heard it, and she was so mad at me because I was listening to music with cursing on it. Because my parents, I guess, tried to, in a sense, protect me from that. But the one thing about trying to protect a child is when you make something taboo, you make it more attractive. Whether that be sex, whether that be drugs, whether that be alcohol, making it taboo will always make it more attractive. I feel that it's important to have these conversations with your children and not necessarily make it as taboo. I think that that would really go a long way to helping uh, children to understand it. And so, yeah.
And you saying that you dating yourself by listening to DMX, so I'm really dating myself because the first really uncensored album that I got my hands on, because I also lived in a household where my parents, kind of forbid it. So I had to
Mhm.
sneak around there to listen to it. So the first tape that I really got my hands on was Slick Rick the Ruler. And so I'm dating myself. And the first song on that album was Treat Her Like a Prostitute. As soon as you press play, that's what came on. So along
Mhm.
with the music and the movies that we used to sneak and watch and the peer pressure that we experience with guys saying, "Hey, are you having sex? Do you know what something? Do you know what a vagina looks like? Or did you whatever the case might be? All those things mixed together, it does result in a very unhealthy way of looking at sex and looking at women, despite some of the education, if you want to call it that my parents tried to provide. But like you said, it was less of an education from them and more of a taboo type thing. Like, just don't do it, don't touch it. We're not going to have a conversation about it. You just not supposed to do it. But on the other hand, I had all these other messages coming from friends and TV and music and the older guys around the block. So, a lot of the times they won out. They won out on that message because their voices was much more louder. The TV messages came across way more frequently than my mom saying, "Hey, stay away from those girls." So the unhealthy parts of sex definitely influenced me more as a young guy. So that's one of my goals in my son's life is to try to be a louder voice than all the voices that's going on now. But at the age of 13, and Akil, your son is 16, um, they have social media,
Mhm.
something that I did that wasn't present when I was younger. So the voices from so many different people are so much louder. So I appreciate that. You guys' answers, and I kind of asked that question to get a baseline to see where we're coming from, and from what both of you guys said, I can see that our baselines are pretty similar. We can come from there's a lot of similarities in common experiences in our background. Um, so as we move on to the conversation, and we know the topic is from property to um, misogyny, we have another guest that I want to join to the panel. But first, I want to talk to the guys to see where we're from, where we're starting from, and then I want to join Dr. Toya Like to the conversation. So for those of you that are watching, before I bring it on, I can give you just a brief intro for Dr. Toya. She's a professor. She's a professor in criminal justice and criminology in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology in the University of Missouri in Kansas City. She's also a interim chair of the Race and Gender and Ethnic Studies Department at the university. And her research, she examines the intersection of race, of gender, and class. So help me welcome Dr. Light to the panel, and then we're going to continue with our conversation. Hello, Dr. Toya. How are you?
Good. Good to be with you guys.
Okay, so I know you was backstage listening to some of our conversations. Before I even ask any other questions, what are your thoughts so far on what you've heard? Before I ask any other question.
Yeah, it was really insightful hearing how, you know, for all of you, having, adult figures, parental figures, really the story is don't do it, right? Like don't do it. And sometimes not those other pieces about why not to do it or really educating us about sex. But I thought it was really intriguing too, thinking about the importance of the peer group and especially for males, and how peer influences really do take over at a certain age. And so those peer influences, the role of pop culture, especially music, and how that informs us about of relationships and interactions in our sexual social mores. And so that was really intriguing to hear and how thematic that was, for all three of you. That was I think really telling.
Thank you. Now we can hear you clearly now, but you was breaking up for a second and you froze. So I just want to make sure that you was aware that you froze
Uh-oh.
for a second. But you sound all right now. You
I
sound all right
wasn't.
now. Okay.
Okay, good, good.
So
Hopefully
so
no
let's
more
hop.
problems.
Yeah, you're good now. So let's hop into the conversation of the night. Really, um, this property to misogyny, and of course, as I talk when I refer to property, I'm talking about slavery. A very huge part of our Black history, and some of the things that went on to us as people, us as a culture. And as I have these conversations this month, I've had these conversations in the past. There are some people that might give a little pushback and might say, slavery was so long ago. Um, is it actually still affecting you guys now? Is it still as traumatic? So my first question to you: would you agree or would you disagree? Would you say, being that slavery was so long ago, does it still have an effect on us as Black people in 2022?
Absolutely. I think James was saying this earlier. You said that we all Black people suffer from a form of PTSD, and there's literature that supports that. And one scholar calls it post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? That we are still dealing with the ramifications of slavery in our society and how it impacts even our relationships with each other. So I would say absolutely yes.
Yeah. Yes, I would also agree. The one thing that we forget about slavery is that once slavery ended, everything wasn't great for us. For us, it wasn't like slavery ended and then we just went to this utopia. We then had to deal with Reconstruction, which was a byproduct of slavery. We then had to deal with segregation, which was a byproduct of slavery. So we dealt with this for years, as well as the view of us being seen as less than, being seen as less than human. So in certain cases, some people still see us as that. If you watch the news, certain, whenever you see a person of color, they refer to them as that thug. They don't even have a name. They're just the thug. I was fortunate enough to leave the country a couple of weeks ago, and I saw the difference with how people of color treat each other. I was in the Dominican Republic, and you see the difference with how we treat each other there. Even though they had slavery, their slavery didn't last as long as it did here in the continental U.S. So their views of each other as Black people changed over there. They see each other differently than we do here, as opposed to us here. Uh, we still have this competitiveness. We still see each other in a sense as enemies. Not all the time, but we see each other as enemies. We also uh, have this need, in a sense, for white America's approval. And a lot of what we do is to reach the level of success that they have reached. I'm not sure if any of you were fans of James Baldwin, but James Baldwin was on a Dick Cavett show. And Dick Cavett asked James Baldwin, he asked, well, why are the Negroes so upset? You all have Black millionaires, Black people in television, Black athletes, Black mayors. Why are you so unhappy? And James Baldwin said, well, what makes you think that's what we wanted? What makes you think that that's our view of success? Unfortunately, our views of success are based on the views of success as a slave. If you think about it, a lot of us, we grade our level of success by how well we're accepted by society. And that still carries on to this day. And it goes back to it has its roots in slavery. That's why you'll see people of color that are afraid to wear African type clothing, why they're afraid to use Afrocentric type names. That's a byproduct of slavery because it forced us to have this shame within ourselves and to see ourselves as less than human.
So I would also agree. I would also say that, slavery, the slavery experience, the chattel slavery experience is still very prevalent to this day. And, there are like every experience is connected, just like, your, great, things and ideas and things that your great grandparents did or said still affect us because there's a connection. They told something to their child, and their child told something to their child, and their child told something to their child, and it keeps going. And now we're all here today. Like, you can't sever that. It can't be, as much as some people may try to, you can't de-link that, right? It also makes me think about, like, from a mathematical standpoint, it makes me think about finance. It makes me think about compound interest, right? So the issue of compound interest, like, that. So on the other side of it, Europeans that might say today, well, I had nothing to do with slavery. I wasn't there. And even if your family didn't specifically own enslaved Africans, you still benefit from, the residual income and the residual wealth from a whole society that was built on a chattel slavery system. So likewise, this is a zero sum game. So we are still experiencing those residual effects of that chattel slavery system. All of us here. Some people try to, be disingenuous and really just intellectually dishonest when they say things like, slavery was a long time ago, kind of get over it. And you can kind of tell when people say things like that, there's really, you can sense like the frustration because they don't want to be held accountable, or even if black people say it, it's because black people psychologically, don't want to be reminded and connected to that type of trauma. And I guess we can understand that to an extent, but you can't escape that. Like we can't escape it. We got to confront it and deal with it. And really, I think that's going to have to happen in order for us to move on and remove ourselves from European domination. Because I think that's the real solution to these types of problems that we're discussing here tonight. European domination. As long as there's European domination, then we're going to be classified as these like sex objects. Males and females are going to be classified as sex objects, because that is the vision. That is how we were viewed in the Eurocentric psyche, and in these caricatures of us. And like we mentioned, commercial rap music, a lot of that, that idea of black manhood, a lot of that is tied to these ideas of the unintelligent thug, right? That's a creation. That's a creation of a Eurocentric fantasy. And a lot of us, absent any other type of strong teaching and ideology, just kind of flock to that and get caught up in that, because it's so overwhelming, because you see it all around you, and you experience it. And sometimes you may benefit from playing into those stereotypes. So I definitely believe that there's slavery is still alive and well. And they even like neurological scholars that will say that the human brain doesn't know the difference between the past and the present. So if that, like, just like how you might have been traumatized by something that happened 30 years ago, like, and you get reminded of it, you get triggered. So when you're triggered, you're not thinking, well, that was 30 years ago. Why am I so mad about that? You feel that could have happened yesterday. Again, it's that compounded effect. Every time you get reminded of it, it's almost like it just happened yesterday. And the same thing can be said for positive experiences. It's like, oh, you feel like it just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And if I may, that also affects from parent to child, because sometimes we have these traumas in our lives, and we may pass these traumas on to either our children or other people in our community. So these same things that we're struggling with, we will teach our children, don't do this because I don't want this to happen to you. I can think back to a time with my great grandfather, who was born in the 1920s, who went through real racism. And when I first got my job, when I got my office, the first thing that he said was, be careful with talking to white people. Be careful with what you say. Don't be too aggressive. Also, be careful of some of those ignorant black people. He didn't call them black people, but be careful with them. You don't want to lose that job that you have. You work too hard to get that job. And this is something that he wasn't trying to harm me in any way. He had suffered so much trauma throughout his life that he was afraid of me suffering that trauma. So he was someone who actually got to see the civil rights era. He was someone that was around during the time when they were routinely hanging black people from trees. He lived through that time frame. So he inadvertently passed that on to me. So just that right there, that passes on to us generationally, because that fear is transferred to us.
Yeah. And as both you guys were talking, it reminded me of a conversation that I had when I was in grad school. I can't remember the name of the class, but I know it was some class. It was a class about genealogy, and we were talking about our history. And one of the young ladies started to talk about how her family owned the land in about half the county, some small county in West Virginia. And in my mind, I couldn't fathom, like, how do you own all the land in this county? And as we start to talk about it more, and she started going more into a history, she revealed that her family did own some slaves, and they was able to buy land, and that's how, and they benefited from that, as you were saying, Akil, and the family is still benefiting from what they gained back then. And she was actually one of the young ladies that asked a similar question. Slavery was so long ago. How is still affecting you now. And I couldn't imagine how she could see how things still benefited her away from slavery, still benefited her family, but how slavery couldn't still be traumatic to us now. Just on a different side of the coin.
Yeah.
And as you was talking about like just the benefits and how it's passed down, just that reminded me of that conversation we had. And you also started talking about like just the sexual objectification of Black people. And that's what I want to kind of dive into next. And I know you guys probably have a bunch of knowledge and wisdom and understanding about the sexual duties that the Black slave had to go through. Let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what were some of those sexual duties, and can you draw any parallels from those duties or those behaviors that was forced upon Black people and what's going on now in 2022?
I definitely can. I definitely can. But before I answer that, I want to like address like the white woman that was in your class. That's an example of this of a psychopathic nature, right? Bobby Wright wrote a book called "The Psychopathic Racial Personality." It's really a critique of Europeans, and that imbalance where she was able to understand, like, yeah, like I'm wealthy, my family is wealthy, and we're comfortable because of the slavery experience, right? But then not be able to, on the flip side, understand, or to, whether she was playing dumb or not. But I think she might not even been playing dumb, because she might have honestly believed in her mind that slavery really has no effect on Black people to this day. But that is the mark of a psychopath, right? To not be able to see that, like, the type of balance, because it's the same situation, but it's experienced in two different ways by two different groups of people, right? So I want to say that. But to your question about the parallels to 2022 and the how Black people were utilized, in a sexual nature, on the plantation, whether it's through being a breeder, right? Because we really were like, how the same way that people mate pit bulls for dog fights, right? Or just breed, or not even for dog fights, but just breed any type of animal. Like, we were chattel, hence the term chattel slavery. And women the same way, men and women, both being utilized for reproduction, right? And also women being utilized even more so for, as I guess, so-called there's so many terms, but like belly
Bed
warmer
wench.
was one of the terms,
Bed
bed
wench.
wenches. There's this young white boy, he's 13 or 12. His father wants him to lose his virginity. Go get one of the Negro women. Go get one of them. Just this, the commodification of Black bodies, and the commodification of Black women in this way has a very long history. And the problem becomes, I think, in 2022 is by us in many ways being disconnected from our African culture and our true African heritage, pre-colonial. We start to emulate in an attempt to assimilate and become more American. We as Black males, a lot of times we try to emulate what white men are doing and how white men treat, Black women. So whereas they were objectifying Black women for such a long time, and then we see that as success. So then we go back to, like I mentioned earlier, about the collection, the commodification, and the collection of women. So it's like, as a slaveholder, if you have a lot of, you collect Black women, and those Black women can work for you. Those Black women can, be sexually gratify you at times when you need to. They're your property, and those Black women can also produce more enslaved Africans for you, right? So then they're an asset because they help you to produce income. So then, in many ways, we've adopted that behavior, right, without thinking critically about the fact that we're doing that. And it's celebrated in many ways. So at some point we have to, more of us at least, because some of us already are doing this, more of us have to take a stand, and I think just recognize that we need to stop acting like white men. And I think that becomes more. I think that would be, a much more effective, attempt, a much more effective method of us getting out of this kind of mess, that we're in. And then I think that can also serve to kind of push back on the gender war that is very prevalent in a lot of our spaces within the Black community, right? If we just recognize that, like some of us, like you're acting like white men, like this is historical. There's historical precedence for this, and we just have to be conscious of it and see it, and also think about, well, why are we socialized this way? And then we get into, okay, well, we need to start thinking more independently as a people, start thinking more about like taking control of the socialization of our young people, building institutions, building schools, instead of just attempting to um, get our own children into the so quote unquote best institutions that are available that are controlled by other people, so that our children end up, they might become brilliant at engineering, STEM fields, social sciences, liberal arts, but then they're still in institutions that are controlled by other people that are still gonna reinforce these ideas of our lack of humanity. And then we still end up, many years from now, still, Black men, dehumanizing Black women, and Black women dehumanizing Black men, because we're being socialized to do that in order to maintain the status quo, even if some of us have jobs and have more money.
Well,
Mhm.
before I
Dr.
say
Toy,
anything, I'd
what's
like to
your
give
what's
Dr.
your thoughts on that? Some of the
I'm sorry.
sexual duties that black slave was subject
Yeah,
to, and
absolutely
how it's still affecting us now.
agree.
I think you're frozen.
Yeah, I think that you may have frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, and am I frozen again? Because sometimes I can hear you, maybe, and
We can
then
hear you. We can hear you
is it
now.
okay? And I still yes. Okay, perfect. Well, I agree with everything Akil was sharing. In that when we think about that slaves were property, right? And so males being forced to reproduce, males and females being forced to reproduce. And so, sort of the ways in which black males were treated as studs. And at the same time, black women, and so the control of their bodies in terms of reproduction, because their offsprings, because of chattel slavery, were property for slave owners, but also the ways in which especially the sexual violence and brutalization perpetrated upon black women, and the violence that they incurred, but also that concomitantly happening with the emasculation of black men in those contexts, right? And so that they had no agency to protect their mothers, their daughters, their partners at all. And so, what that does to the psyche and what that does to gender relations in the Black community, and we see the impact of it today, and the outputs of misogyny, as Akil pointed out, the ways in which we've taken on these sort of colonized mentalities about violence and violence perpetrated upon black women. It is a very sort of Western European sort of view of seeing women and girls as property and something to be owned and possessed, and then how that equates to these sort of hyper forms of masculinity, hegemonic masculinity among males, where we see then violence being perpetrated against black women in these ways. I think Malcolm X said it best. There's no other person is more disrespected than Black America, in bearing those burdens, but also how that produces this disconnect, especially in terms of what that means to be a Black woman in America, in Black femininity, especially contemporarily, and its roots historically, where submission is a part of sort of epitomized or these emphasized forms of femininity. Given that your family could be taken away from you at any moment, black women had no capital in submission in that way, and sort of embracing these sort of middle class standards of femininity. And so again, the role that it's had on the Black family, stability in the Black family, and then reproducing these very toxic sort of gender dynamics between the two groups, and that divide and conquer sort of um, socialization that it produced and instilled that still has ramifications on how we interact and how we view each other today.
Thank you. I totally agree. James, what's your thoughts on that question?
You two actually hit on everything that I was going to say. But yeah, I do believe that the property mentality that has changed us. If you ever go to certain households, you may see these men who equate, uh, I guess, dominance or dominating a female with taking care of their household. I'm pretty sure you may have been to homes or know of homes where the man will say, "Don't raise your house, don't raise your voice in my house." Well, this woman's not a child, so you can't tell her not to raise her voice. Or you may have certain men that do not want their women to do better than them. That is a side effect of slavery. Another aspect that I don't think that we hit on, even though we discussed women, we're also haven't covered buck breaking. That's something that was huge in slavery. How a lot of black men, they were broken, raped, both physically, mentally, and emotionally, uh, to make them acquiesce to the wants or needs of their masters. That's still happening to this day, and that's something that we don't discuss enough about. Even if you just take a look at television, uh, men aren't as masculine as they used to be. And in a sense, it's actually seen as a bad thing in certain cases. If you're looking at television, you're seeing a lot more men wearing dresses, wearing makeup, and they're pushed more uh, for doing that. It's in a sense a form of buck breaking. Um, Unfortunately, we as a people, we've been broken for years. As I've said earlier, our vision of success is how well we adapt to society's standards, and it goes back to slavery. You have this slaves that fought, they resisted, but the ones that were treated the best were the ones who uh, I won't say bent over backwards, but who acquiesced to what their master wanted. If they weren't as resistant to the needs of their master, they were the ones that were promoted. They were the ones that were treated better. They were the ones that were seen as the ideal slave, both men and women. Now let's skip ahead to society now. Who's seen as our role models? Not the ones who stand out, not the ones that are independent thinkers, not the ones that buck the trend or fight the norm. The ones that are seen as the most popular are the ones that are acquiescing to our quote unquote masters of today. If you take a look at what hip hop is now, and this is a conversation that I had with someone earlier, if you look at female rappers now, a female rapper can't be famous now if she's not showing her body. You can't just listen to her lyrics now. She has to show some skin in order to be paid attention to. She has to be hypersexualized in order to be paid attention to. Her mind is not important. Now, if you skip back to slavery, how was the black woman paid attention to? You have to have done something for the master. You have to have become property. You have to have been used to be paid attention to be seen as worthy. If you bucked that trend and if you stepped outside and began to think for yourself, that was seen as dangerous. That was seen as the quote unquote being a B word nowadays. That's what that's seen as. So I believe that carries over or has carried over from slavery and from the way that we see both men and women.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And Dr. Toya, and James, you guys pointed out something very important about how black women and black men were seen as property. As we talked about the treatment and the conditions that they were put through. And that was one of the explanations or justifications of what white people and slave masters, slave owners used to justify their treatment. But there was also some pathologizing of black women, um, where they took things that was normal and made it seem abnormal, so they can justify the inhumane treatment. Let's talk about that. And that didn't only happen with black women, of course, that happened with black men. So we can talk about that as well. But how were black people were pathologized back then, so they can justify some of this treatment?
Yeah, I think about the, often debated and contested Willie Lynch letter and whether, you know, regardless of the historical context and some of the debates around that, what's really holds is exactly what you're talking about, and that is sort of the pathology of divide and conquer politicking, in ways of breaking down, right, community. And I think about this in terms of how community is so important to Black people even today. We haven't, I think, as you all were saying earlier about sort of the taking on these sort of Western mentalities and ideals are so far removed from kind of our, cultural norms and things that certainly we embrace from our African ancestry and the role of community. And so when you pit older slaves against younger slaves, field slaves from, house slaves, and males against females, right? And that it was all, it was the psychology of it, right? That, I think about Harriet Tubman's statement that, she had freed thousands of slaves and she could have freed even more if they only knew that they were free. And so how do you, you know, aside from physically breaking a person down, you do it psychologically. And so I think this is exactly what James was touching on about then this not that they were bending over, but this sort of acquiescing in some ways, out of fear and that sort of trauma. And I think about, uh, education scholars show over and over again that Black children, you know, up until the age of 7, they're scoring almost right in, along, or if not higher than white children on these aptitude, intelligence tests, and all of these things. But something happens as they get older, and what some argue is that, sort of again these ramifications, or this legacy, if you will, of slavery and things that we are still taught today. Like, how many of us have heard our parents say before, like, don't touch that. When we get in this store, don't touch nothing, don't ask for nothing, right? But those are relics from slavery, right? And it was a protective measure, really to protect children, given the harsh realities and the environment and context of slavery. But that these are things that we pass on. And what it does is it doesn't allow children to explore their environments, right? When they're absorbing the most information. And so they're not exploring, they're not navigating in a way that will produce, right, that level of intellect that Akil was talking about earlier, that, the importance of asking questions. We should question everything. I think James was talking about this before, that we shouldn't just take things as that's just the way it is. I even like how, when everyone was talking about rap, they're very clear to articulate they were talking about commercialized forms of rap. That is right. That is sort of the white standard and what is put out there in terms of rap music. We know rap music, and hip hop as a culture is so much vast and broader than that. That is not what is played. That's not what's given airtime. And so these ways in which we constantly reproduce these ideas and socially reproduce ideas of Blackness as being something that is toxic, um, unhealthy, unstable, right? Again, a lot of it is birthed out of this tragic legacy of slavery and how it impacts us today.
Nah, I definitely agree. I appreciate that. Thank you, brother Akil. I see you took your mic off. What are your thoughts on that? How were black women, even and black men, pathologized to justify like the rape and the breeding, like animals? What were some of the things that were taught by the slave master?
So when I think of the pathologizing of the Black woman, I think of some words of the late Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who in one of his lectures stated that, what we have to do as Black people is we have to look at, the way Europeans have treated themselves and have treated their own people and treated their own women and their own children. And so what I want to read this brief excerpt from one of his contemporaries, the late Dr. Jacob Carruthers in Intellectual Warfare, where he references Greek mythology, because I think mythology is very important, because when you get into like creation stories, that is very influential and very informative of a group's culture. And then, even if it is mythology and we accept it as mythology, it's still, people learn these stories and people believe in these ideas, and these ideas then in turn inform how people act in real life and in real time. So he talks about like, this story from Greek mythology about the creation of women, right? And he says that, let me see, all of this changed when the god Prometheus, against the will of Zeus, used trickery in an attempt to improve man's lot. Prometheus asserted, I took from man expectancy of death and conferred the gift of fire so that man could master many arts thereby. As a punishment, his ways, they start talking about women, right? In European society, in Greece, ancient Greece, which is the intellectual, foundation of Western society, right? That we live in now. As punishment, Zeus created woman, Pandora, who was given a face like an immortal goddess, the lovely figure of a virgin girl, sly manners, and the morals of a bitch. I remember the first time I read this, I thought I was listening to something from Lil Wayne. I really did. But it just goes to show that, like, how these cultural ideas and these cultural norms are duplicated, and they spread, and they continue on, ad infinitum. It then goes on to say lies were put in her breast, and she was given persuasive words and cunning ways. So equipped, she became the quote unquote ruin of mankind. She opened up the box and scattered pains and evils among men. So this concept of a Pandora's box, right? Mankind is thus doomed to misery because they, quote, love this ruin in their hearts. Women, who are indispensable to man's enjoyment, can never be trusted. Hesiod warns, don't let a woman wiggling her behind and flattering and coaxing take you in. Woman is just a cheat. The theme of divine discord, which emphasizes the conflict between the male and female divinities, is inherent in human life. So what Jacob Carruthers is pointing out is like, this is Eurocentric thought. This is European thought. This does not come from an African worldview. So this is very European. So this idea that you can never trust a woman, regardless, right? And this is the idea, and again, many of us have inherited that because that's like the standard, in our society. So on the plantation, it becomes easy to say, well, there's a hierarchy, because the white woman is still not seen as a full human being. But I also don't want to let white women off the hook, because in the plantation system and in chattel slavery, the white man and the white woman were, allies. They were working together to maintain that plantation system. And I think a lot of times, something I've been thinking about in recent years, is how a lot of times we let the white woman off the hook because she's being oppressed by the white man, but yet the white woman is supporting the white man in the oppression of Black people generally. So we have to start indicting the white woman as well, generally speaking. But then it's like, okay, well, the Black woman is gonna be seen and treated even worse than the white woman is gonna be treated. And this is something that had been going on within the European culture for thousands of years. So I think that it's important for us to try to go to the source of just those views on gender dynamics, looking at it through a European lens, and seeing how so if we try to kind of reform this way of thinking, this can't be reformed, because foundationally, the woman in their eyes, the woman is not a human, the woman is not to be trusted, and never will be. So again, it's about trying to get into another system, another way of thinking, another way of knowing, just another way of existing. But I think that, to your question, I think that this has a lot to do with, how it was so easy to objectify Black women on the plantation, to brutalize black women on the plantation. I think words like that are important. Brutalize, because I think anything less than brutality is it becomes a euphemism, right? And yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to say about that.
I appreciate it. What where did that insert come from again?
So this is a text called Intellectual Warfare by Dr. Jacob Carruthers.
I appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna look that up. James, what are your thoughts on
In all honesty, I think that it started when we were taught that we weren't human, so we were dehumanized. So we were realized that our mind wasn't really valuable. What was valuable were our physical attributes. So as a man, you were valuable if you were strong. If you ever read the old slave ledgers, whenever they describe a slave, it would say, fertile hips, strong as an ox, good builder. It was never intelligent, never a good problem solver. And if we take a look at how things work today, if you go to a club now and you see a woman that's single that's looking to find a man, how does she dress? She doesn't go out with a nice conservative business suit. She goes out with tight pants, high heels, low cut blouse, something revealing, because in certain cases, these women realize that that's what's going to attract those men, not their intellect. Their intellect is always, not always, but it tends to be put on the back burner. That physical appeal is usually put out front. Same thing with a lot of guys. What do? We wear chains, we wear the jewelry, we wear these physical things to try to draw you to us because we think that we're not as important without those things, without those physical attributes. We're not as valuable, and I think that's something that carries over from slavery. I used to often get into, I guess, joking arguments with the women that I worked with, and my joke was that I would never buy a woman a drink if I don't know you, because I just don't know you. And the thing that they would always say is, well, you may find your next wife, why don't you pay her for her time? I would say, well, you can pay me for mine because I have intellect. What about your conversation is so important? It, is it because you have this tight dress on or you're wearing this revealing outfit? Okay, great. Once I get past that, what else do you have? What else can you offer besides your body? And often, once you remove that from people, their relationship suffers. Their views of themselves or of you suffers because that's the first thing that they have to offer because they think that that's what's important to getting you. Again, that's something that comes from slavery. That's something that comes from being objectified for years. If you take a look at hip hop, it's look at my butt, look at my breast, and even if you look at reality television now, how do all the reality TV stars? They're all going down to other countries, getting the Brazilian butt lifts, or they're getting the implants, or the weaves, or the hypersexualized clothing, because that's what they think is appealing. But if you say, well, you know what, I'm Doctor Such and Such. Yeah, that's nice. That's cool. Even with Michelle Obama's brilliant. But you hear conversations where you say, oh yeah, she's brilliant, but she's a sister. You see that butt? This is one of the most educated first ladies that we've ever had. And your focus is on her physical attribute. That's what's important. So that carries over now. So that has us dehumanizing ourselves. That has us thinking that our other attributes are nowhere near as important as our physical attributes. So once those physical attributes start to wane, we start to get a little depressed. We start to wonder, well, what is my place here? I'm not strong. I don't have the body. What else can I use to lure you in, or what else can I use to feel important? That's why you have so many people that are dressing provocatively, speaking provocatively, because that's the only time that they feel important, because they're getting attention.
I appreciate it. Thank you, bro. Like y'all don't understand like the insight and the knowledge that I'm gaining just from listening to y'all. Like I love these intellectual that that you guys are speaking about, I'm definitely growing and learning. I kind of want to pivot a little bit.
Brother Bracewell, I think that you're freezing. I don't know,
Can
Doctor. Like you may have
can you
passed me your
hear me? Am I
Wi-Fi. I don't know.
frozen?
We hear you now.
Yeah.
You're back.
There we go.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So I want to kind of pivot the conversation. We've took a deep dive into like the treatment of women and men and slaves and the sexual impact that it's having on us right now in 2022. But so I want to speak to the young men of the next generation. The young men in 2022 that are going to be feel like I keep breaking up for some reason.
We hear you.
We're here. You're fine.
You guys continue? Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the things uh to help advance the next generation of men. There's a theory in the psychology world about moral development. And this theorist talks about how it's three levels of moral development. The first level is called pre-conventional. So he's basically saying that we base our behaviors and our decisions, our actions, is based on the reward and the consequences that we can get. Um, am I breaking up?
No,
No,
you're
not right
fine.
now.
I hear you.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, I see my screen keep going in and out, so I'm not sure. And then he talks about the second level of moral development, which is called the conventional level. And he said at that stage of life or at that point, we base our decisions and our behaviors really on what socially has taught us. Things like the law and authority. Um, our actions and our decisions are based on that. And then that he has a third level, which he calls post-conventional, where our behaviors are based on just fairness, equality, um, ethics, and just pure morals. So my
Yeah, I think that you froze. Yeah, I think that he froze. He should be back up in a couple of seconds.
So frustrating when you freeze because it's like there's nothing you could do about it.
question,
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
There you go. I think that
can
we
you
got you
hear me
back.
at all?
Yes.
We
Now we
got you
can.
back. Yes.
Now
You
we
guys-
can. It stopped when you said your question and then it froze.
Okay. So my question is, I don't know what's going on with my internet. So my question is, what can we do for the next generation of men to help them show up for Black women more loving and more protective, in making better moral decisions towards
Hmm. I don't know who would like to go first. I guess I can hold my opinion. I don't know if anybody else wanted to go first.
I'll go. I'll bite. I think that I think it goes back to the like with anything like the socialization process. I think that in many ways, um, socialization process is very westernized and very much like which involves the commodification not just of Black women but of Black people and just of people in general. So and now a lot of times what happens is, um, whereas like if brothers were already kind of miseducated into wanting to commodify Black women, now it's more popularized and publicized for Black women to also attempt to commodify Black men at the same time. So now, and now also what happens is now that's seen as Black excellence. That's seen as like winning. And a lot of times we have these conversations where if if we criticize a black woman for commodifying a black man, which is worthy of critique, then the response is, well, black men have been doing that. Well, even if that's true, in which it is true in many cases, black men should not have been doing that. And then where I go with that is it goes back to, white society, European domination, our socialization process being controlled by a European ideology, which requires for us, in order to not reach our full humanity, so that we can be under their control, for us to kind of look at ourselves a certain way, to dehumanize ourselves, and to look at our peers the same way. So I think that it goes back to like institution building, a different type of rites of passage programs, because inevitably, organically, there will always be rites of passage, right? Just like in a lot of communities, like like we talked about earlier, when I was growing up, a rites of passage for boyhood was to have sex, lose your virginity, right? And not to say that there's nothing wrong with losing your virginity, but if you're, if in the midst of that, you're, objectifying and commodifying and trying to like just collect girls and trying to just basically, as we say, get your tip wet, in many different places as you can, like that's unhealthy. That can be unhealthy, and I think a lot of us, when we were younger, we thought that was cool. But I think a lot of us, when we as we've grown older, we get into our late 30s and in our 40s, we start to look back on some of our behaviors, and we like, nah, like that probably wasn't cool. And I know it's probably a lot of brothers that are in therapy now in their 30s and 40s and are probably unearthing a lot of issues that they've had throughout their adult lives, and realizing that a lot of the issues that we probably had with women and in romantic relationships is due to our perception of women and of girls that was given to us when we were teenagers and when we were preteens, right? So I think that socialization, we have to take, as a community, have to start taking control of the socialization process, and really adopt this mindset of going into that we're in competition with the currently existing institutions, because a lot of those institutions that we go to, like the schools, like the a lot of the after school programming, the mainstream media definitely are really in place to to kill us, to have us, like Dr. King talked about, a slow psychological death, maybe not a rapid and quick death, but a slow psychological death that has us under the belief that this is how we're supposed to act, when this is really not how we're supposed to act. So I think that once we do that, and it's a tall order. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to be easy. We can't microwave this. This has to be, this is long-term, protracted, and sustainable work that, committed people have to commit to. And I mean, everybody doesn't have to be, committed at the same level, but I think it really has to do with like us taking over the socialization process of our young people, because those young people are going to become the adults that inherit the management, the responsibility of managing our communities. And if we can just start having more conversations like this, and then those conversations also include actionable steps that can lead to this type of like socialization being done differently, even if it's on a small scale, because sometimes people get discouraged from doing anything if they feel like, well, no, that's not going to be big enough, that's not going to do nothing. Similar to how people say, well, I don't want to save $10 out of every paycheck because that's not a whole lot of money. But no, that $10 is going to add up. Back to what we talked about earlier, compound interest, right? And this is why, like, we still are, the recipients of the experience of chattel slavery to this day, right? So my point is, I guess, that we as a community have to take over the socialization and start having some very explicit conversations. And us that are older have to like be honest about, some of our views and our outlooks from when we were young, and admit that, for lack of a better term, like, that was kind of fucked up. Excuse my language. I don't know if this is a family program, if I'm not supposed to curse, but that's the best way to, I think that's the best way to express that. Like, we're going to have to, have to talk about some of those things. Cause I think that's one thing that we don't do enough of as adults. We don't talk about our losses, and we don't reflect back. We kind of just say, well, everything that we did made us who we are. So there's value in it to an extent, but then we got to think about, well, do you want young people to reproduce and duplicate that behavior? So I think we got to be more open and honest and more intentional about saying, like, listen, like, yeah, I did that, but you shouldn't have to do that. And this is why it wasn't a good idea. At the time when I was 14 and 15, I thought it was a great idea. It made perfect sense. But now I'm 35, now I'm 40. I realize it doesn't make good sense. And this is why I wish somebody had this conversation with me and start having those conversations, But and it's difficult with things like, sometimes like your sexual experiences, with women and with girls, because we kind of like a lot of times we sit back, we laugh about it, like, yeah, I used to, I shouldn't have done that, but we kind of say it in a certain way where we're kind of laughing about it and kind of joking about it, because we're kind of proud of what we did and how we were moving,
Mm-hmm.
So, but we got to really like be honest about saying like, nah, that actually wasn't cool, because it didn't have, long term, it had more of a, like, if we do a cost benefit analysis, long term, it had more of a net negative effect than a net positive effect. If we think about it like that, and we have to have those conversations with young people.
Yeah, I agree.
In all honesty, I think that one of the things that can help us is we need to start teaching our young people how to value themselves. You can't find value in someone else if you feel that you yourself have no value. So that's one of the first things that we can do. And valuing yourself is not necessarily about getting good grades, being star athletes. Those are good. Those are good starts. But learning how to value who you are. I did an episode of my show called The Rise, and we did an episode called "Am I Black Enough? What it means to be black in Black America." And one of the key focuses of that show was that we feel that we have to fit a certain, I guess, criteria to be accepted in the black community. And the consensus amongst everyone is whoever you are now, that's good enough. That's black enough. That's who you should be. Unfortunately, a lot of things in society will tell you that you're not good enough. Oh, you have a car, but you don't have a Bentley. Oh, level up. You have an apartment. Oh, you don't have a big mansion. Level up. Instead of that, we should start teaching each other. You know what? No. Focus, figure out what you want. Figure out what makes you happy. Figure out what completes you. And then once you figure that out, figure out why. Once you can figure out the why, you will then begin to understand yourself. Once you can understand yourself, you can then start to understand each other. Unfortunately, we tend to find in relationships, we tend to look for someone to fill the holes that we have in our lives. Instead of us fixing these holes ourselves, we look for others to cover it, to fill these holes. So we're saying, oh, well, you complete me. Well, no, you should be kind of complete when you meet someone. It's not really their job to babysit you. So when you meet someone and they don't meet this view that you have in your head of how they should be, you devalue them because your view is, well, no, you're supposed to fill this hole that I have because I don't feel good enough, but you have to fill that. So you then start to devalue start to devalue each other. Another thing that we can work on is we need to stop seeing each other as competition. That's one of the things that the feminist movement has created. And I'm not knocking the feminist movement at all, but that's one of the things that society has created. Men and women, instead of being seen as partners and allies, we're seen as competitors. We have to one up each other. If you look on television, you'll see at times women that will brag about the fact that some celebrity divorced her husband and she got all of his money. Why are we bragging about that? Or you may find some male celebrity that divorced his wife. Oh yeah, well he divorced her, but he upgraded. He got himself a better woman now, just better looking and younger. Why are we celebrating that? Why are we in competition? Why is everything about us beating each other? Again, it goes back to the slave mentality. The slave mentality is I have to be better than this other slave so that I can be accepted by society. So that I can be accepted by master. Even though we may not have masters in the same form of slavery, we all still have masters, whether it be corporate masters, to be masters in our churches, masters in our lives, there are still masters out there. And for some reason, a lot of people are still seeking to please that master. And as long as you look to please that master, you're not pleasing yourself. And if we're teaching this same thing to children, they're now learning how to please those same masters. I interviewed a guy some months ago, and he's a big time Trump supporter. And I'm not trying to veer off topic. Uh, and folks were literally arguing uh, over Trump versus Biden. And he said, we're trying to figure out which master to serve. Why can't we just figure out what's good for us, what we need? And if we can do that ourselves, we can pass it on to children. The children can understand that. They can understand their value. They can see the value in another woman because they're not seeing her as someone that we need to fill that hole that's missing in our lives.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah,
Thank you.
I
Thank you for that.
definitely
Yes, cool. Go ahead, close us out, Dr. Toya.
I so agree with everything that was already said. That I love that your title is miseducation, right? The sexual miseducation. If we were miseducated, then there that implies that there is a proper education, and that this discussion, right, and this dialogue is a part of that of leading us in that right direction. And so, I always say that I was very fortunate to be educated until my college years by Black educators, and so I knew the contributions that we made. I never even used the word minority to describe myself. I didn't see myself as a minority because I was the majority in my community and in my school, right? And so I saw us represented across all of these dimensions, from, not just the drug dealer, because we had those in the community, but there was a dentist that lived two doors down from me and ran his practice out of his a level in his home. And so I never even saw myself as less than, right? That wasn't something that I even began to know still existed until I went to college and was introduced to these other dimensions of the world. And so I think about the importance of education, right? If we've been miseducated, how do we get back to that foundation? And I think Akil was talking about this earlier, is that resocialization. And so, teaching us our values. So I knew, for instance, despite pop cultural media, like Egyptians being whites, I knew that they were African, right? And that we built the Niles. I knew about the Moors. I knew about the contributions that we as African Americans made to society at large. And so it taught me to appreciate me and my culture, and that was something that I was very happy to instill in my children. And I think and it's also important, being the mother of a son, right? And so, for instance, part of your question was, how do we help train this younger generation of young men to be there for women? And one of my really close friends who also has a son, and her son, before he could date, he had to take her out on dates. And so she wanted to see if he knew to open the door for her, if certain things that he would do. And I think, as one philosopher that I was talking to put it, he said, so many young men right now are being raised by women. And so, what are we teaching young men, right? And it is not just the responsibility of Black men to teach men, but also Black women. When you think about so many things in terms of the civil rights movement, historically and contemporarily, Black women have always been at the center of those movements. I mean, even the Black Lives Matters movement, to really deal with the issues of maltreatment of Black men at the hands of law enforcement, those were Black women who founded those movements. And so, as James said, that there should not be a divide between Black. When we do what's healthy for our community, we all thrive, right? That there's no division there, that we're healthier and we're stronger together. And so I think it all goes back to education, and not just, like Akil was saying, not what we're taught in formal education, especially if our formal education is happening outside of our communities, but what we are really instilling from the family circle, the things that I learned from my parents, right? The things that taught me to value who I was and to embrace who I am, right? And so I don't ever enter a room unauthentic, right? And that it's okay for me to have natural hair, to present the way that I am and be unapologetically black, and that is okay. And so the more we instill that in our children and embrace that, right? And so, for instance, my daughter, when she was growing up, she had black dolls, and it may have taken a long time to find those dolls, but it wasn't that I was being anti-white. I wanted her to appreciate blackness, and I wanted her to center blackness in a way that our colonized society doesn't. And I think there's so many things that we can and that we do to really make sure that this next generation does value who we are and what we contribute and what we bring. That we are not just athletes, but we're also educators. We're also scientists. We're also right, and that's who we are. That's where we come from. We come from greatness, and so as one sign out or meme I saw is that they didn't steal slaves. They stole greatness, right? They stole scientists. They stole kings and queens. And so when we understand and instill that value into our to the next generation, if we continue to do that, I mean, right, that's how we overcome a lot of these barriers and struggles.
You know what? I love these conversations so much because I think even more than I don't know who's viewing, but I learned some stuff. And tonight was like no different. I think this was one of the best conversations that I had on this topic this month. Um, and I thought I was doing you guys a disservice because I was so busy this week that I just, I wasn't as in contact with y'all as I usually do. But I definitely was not disappointed with any one of you guys, and I want to thank y'all. And I have to reach out to whoever sent you in my direction. I got to reach out to them and thank them as well. I appreciate the conversation, the wisdom, the insight. Just the knowledge that y'all share. Please tell the people where they can connect with you. Because there's some people are gonna watch this on the replay, where they can connect with you, where they can find you. If you got some things coming up, some events coming up, please share that before we disconnect.
So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at All This Math. Also on Facebook, my government name, Akil Parker, and also on Instagram, Akil _Latif, I think. Tomorrow night, I'm actually going to be on another platform with a sister named Zakia Sankara Jabbar, Real Talk with Real Talk with Zakia. We're going to be doing like kind of like a tribute to Dr. Amos Wilson. A tribute to Dr. Amos Wilson. That's tomorrow night on her platform. If you look up at Real Talk with ZSJ, I'm pretty sure that's the Instagram handle, and she has a YouTube channel. So that's what we're going to be discussing. We'll be discussing that tomorrow night, and then Thursday afternoon. Since you asked me about stuff coming up, Thursday afternoon, the Black Educator Pipeline podcast is having a 1-year anniversary program, which goes from like 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock with a lot of different featured like previous guests. And we're going to be just discussing, different things. That's good. That's on there. They have a YouTube channel as well. It's the Black Educator Pipeline Podcast. So Black Educator Pipeline Podcast on Thursday, 12 p.m. That's Thursday. Wednesday, Real Talk with ZSJ, a tribute to Dr. Amos N. Wilson, one of my favorite intellectual heroes and African-centered scholars. That's tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. On her YouTube channel. And I think she broadcasts on Facebook Live as well. I'm pretty sure. She does Facebook Live too.
And is that Eastern or Central Time?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Eastern time. Yeah, everything is Eastern time. I got to start to remember to do that because I'm thinking too small. I'm assuming everybody is on the East Coast or in Philly. I got to get out of some bad habit.
You're going to be going international soon, brother. So you're going to have to
Appreciate it.
Now, Akil, I appreciate everything that you said tonight, man. You're in Philly, so we definitely gonna have to connect.
Okay.
Stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely.
Yeah. Brother James,
Uh,
where can
I can
people
find
connect with you?
me on the Extreme Truth Podcast, XTREME Truth Podcast with my co-host Legend Damian Simmons and James the Icon Grant. Just a heads up for that show, viewers discretion is advised. So it's a slightly different format than you'll see me on here. I also have another show. I'm sorry, you can find it on if you follow our YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook pages. That will give you information so that you can log into or follow our shows. I also have the Fall to Rise podcast, which can be found on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. If you wanted to watch any of our older episodes, they are on YouTube. We've taken a bit of a hiatus. We should be back in about 2 weeks. Uh, on the
You,
Fall to Rise
you said
podcast, so please feel free to
fall
like
fall to rise.
Fall to Rise podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, Fall to Rise podcast.
Mhm.
That one's actually clean. So you know, but no, but both shows are really good. We definitely go after hard hitting topics. I know that this upcoming Monday on the Extreme Truth podcast, we're doing a topic for the first time. Our topic, which is actually going to lead to a new show that I'm creating, is called Inside the Man Cave. So it's actually giving men an opportunity to speak about what we actually feel, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, because that's the conversation that people don't hear often. When men can talk about our vulnerabilities, the things that we fear, the things that we feel. Uh, the good thing about it is a lot of women, they're interested in listening in because they want to understand what's going on inside of our man cave or our minds. So please, please, please like and subscribe to the Extreme Truth, XTREME Truth podcast, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and the Fall to Rise podcast, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Also, please leave a comment. We're always listening for comments, emails. Uh, we're always open for ideas and new topics.
I've sat in on one or two of the Extreme Truth podcasts, so definitely some interesting and spicy conversations, James. So uh, I enjoyed it, entertaining. But I want to thank you as well for being a part of it, man. I love this show and this conversation.
Definitely, I appreciate the invite. Definitely, I look forward to any projects that you have or that you all have in the future. I will definitely be supporting.
Mhm.
Appreciate that. I saw you follow me too, James. I'm gonna follow you back.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
And Dr. Toya, where can the people contact you or follow you?
So social media, Facebook is Toya Loving Life, same for Instagram. And yeah, the university keeps me pretty busy. So unless you're taking classes on crime and justice, that's where I spend a lot of my time. But by the end of the year, I hope to have a manuscript out. It'll get done this year. I've been busy, but
Okay.
on the intersection of race, gender, and class on violence and our experiences with violence in the Black community. So.
Mm.
Great, great. Sounds good. Well, I am your host, A.B. Bracewell, and this is the Sexual Miseducation of Black Men. Once again, thank my special guests. I thank everyone that viewed or is going to watch the replay. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Reach out to me. You can email me. You can instant message me if you want to get in contact with any one of our guests. Have a great night. Thank you.
Good night.